everybody. My name is Barrett, Laurie. I am so excited for today, and I'm going to get my husband's comment off the screen. Welcome to see everybody. My name is Barrett, Laurie. I am happy to have you here. I not only am fabulous, but I run this channel, and today we are doing another live stream author interview. This entire series is about connecting authors and entrepreneurs with my audience so you guys can learn from each other and we can grow as a community together. So with that said, here is our format for those that are new. The first half of the interview is mine, my time, and I will ask questions, and I ask that if you have questions, please drop them in the chat with a Q so I can find them later when we get to the live chat section on the back half of the interview. In the middle, we have a really fun section of rapid fire questions, which I have not shared with my guests in advance. They are quick questions that they will answer with one quick word that pops into their mind. And of course, I want all of you in chat to play along with us when it comes time for that. So without further ado, I am going to introduce our esteemed guest. So Robert Jones was introduced to storytelling as a child through his grandfather, a master of the oral tradition. Early on, comic books and graphic novels drew him toward writing and sequential storytelling, leading him to create his own comics. Later, he would contribute to the history of many of his childhood heroes, working for Marvel and DC Comics with some of the industry's finest writers, including John Ostrander and Alan Moore. As his interest in the art of fiction expanded, he was mentored by legendary writer, editor, and publisher Saul Stein. Robert is currently quarantined in upstate New York with a Faerie and 2 loaves of cats. He is currently working on a series of novels he is planning to self-publish. And with that, it is my great pleasure to welcome my friend, Robert Jones. Welcome. How are you doing?
Good. Hey, Barrett. And hey, everybody. Thanks for having me.
I'm thrilled to have you. My husband, as you know, off screen, is a giant fan. So he was so excited when I got you on here. But so am I, because I am obsessed with your videos and your content and the deep dives into stories. So we have a lot to talk about, a lot of ground to cover. But I want to give you time to just kind of let everybody know about your channel, what you do over there, and what they can find when they check out and subscribe to Story Detective.
Well, my YouTube channel, The Story Detective, is about taking all forms of storytelling and putting it under a Sherlockian microscope and breaking down the craft for the viewer to make their craft journey easier. And you can also find me under my name on Facebook, Story Detective on Instagram, and I'm occasionally on Twitter under Heroes Inc. That's Heroes INK, because I was a comic book inker.
Yep. And all of that is linked in the description box below. So for anyone who is looking to connect with Robert, hop over into the description box and check out all of the links there. There are so many people here we want to say hello to. Richard Holiday, CB, author JL Slipak, JC Carpenter, and look who showed up. Thanks for popping in, Michelle Schusterman. Good to see you. We just hung out with Michelle this morning over on Lisa Daly's channel. So be sure and check that out if you missed it. We got a lot of productivity done over there. But one thing, Robert, I wanted to chat about this morning before we get into the nuts and bolts is you're doing something really cool for a very valued member of my community, and I know yours as well, which is Doll Cecile Bruno. Would you take a quick second just to tell everybody about what you're doing and working on for her? And for everyone who wants to know, there is a link to not only the fundraiser that he's going to talk about, but the video in the description box below. Robert?
Well, I refurbished a computer, and there's editing programs that I know will be right up Dal's alley, and that she could learn a lot from in terms of her editing and writing progress. So after refurbishing the laptop and getting everything ready, I looked in the shipping options, and I found out there were very few, and the ones that were available were hugely expensive. So I started a GoFundMe and looking to get some help with that so we can get that computer to Dal.
Yeah, no, I love that you're doing it. And for anybody out there, it is the holiday season, so we know things are tight. But if you can give anything, the link is in the description box below, and it will really make a difference in Doll's career. And Robert, I can't thank you enough for doing it. It's a really great thing, and I'm proud of you. Thank you for doing it.
Well, it's just helping the community because it's a need, and it's a need that I can definitely fulfill. And anything helps. $1 helps.
Totally. There is no gift too small, and we're grateful for it. So with that, I'm going to shift gears back into all about you. So we talked about your early comics in the intro. Could you tell me a little bit about those that you created?
The early comics that I created, the homemade stuff that I was doing early on.
As a little bit.
There were just like comic books where there were like myself and my friends, and we were the superheroes. So it was filled with a lot of personal jokes and our adventures fighting the villains from Marvel and DC. And it was a lot of fun. And it was me starting out just like most people do, copying comic art and trying to figure out my path and anatomy and storytelling through that. And, it was a self-taught thing, and I got pretty far. Then I went to art school, and then I learned what I didn't know, because we all don't know what we don't know.
Well, I love that. So now, what is it about comics that drew you into storytelling?
It was essentially the sequential art, and that was something that I was into ever since I was a little kid, because I loved storytelling. And what I learned from art school is that there was a whole methodology behind it, and that's what drew me in. And becoming an inker, I was working on other people's art, and it was punching up everything, but I wasn't so much doing the storytelling, except for a couple of short stories that I actually penciled and did layouts myself, but mostly it was inking. But that time that I spent learning storytelling really helped propel me into writing, because I also wanted to write, and there were parallels in there. And that's when I started putting different forms of storytelling together, because we all come from different backgrounds, but all storytelling is valid.
Yeah, no, I agree. So talk to me about the characters that drew you into comics. Like, who were your favorites when you were growing up? What was your favorite stuff to read?
Spider-Man was number one. I mean, I think I was a fan of Spider-Man since I was 2 years old. And as I as I got a little bit older, it was the X-Men. Before the X-Men, I liked the Justice Society, just because they looked like they were such obscure characters from the 1940s. And I thought, these guys look very different and almost like homemade. A hat and a mask could make you like the Lone Ranger or the Green Hornet or whatever. And I guess it was that made up look by making my friends and myself characters in comic books growing up that I thought, I want to know more about this. But that was the origin of comic books from the 1940s. So it was kind of a history lesson that I expanded on. And when I got to art school, some of those guys that created those characters were teaching there. So I got to meet them and got to learn the backstory. So everything is that 6 degrees of separation, and it all kind of comes together as you follow your dream, I think.
Yeah, totally. It's interesting that you say that. I don't think I recognized, and you're a unique person to kind of talk about this with, but I don't think I realized why I loved comics as a kid. I think it was when I was in college and had my first class about the diversity in comics books, and had a professor present to me that X-Men was about civil rights movement, and that
Yes.
might be why, as a queer kid, that it spoke to me. And then I thought, like, wow, I love this idea and this concept. And it really was. And I was sitting in that class as almost as an adult, sitting there thinking, wow, how did this not come to me before? But it's true. I mean, it's there. So yeah.
Comic books in general, and the X-Men especially, I think gave me a different view of the world, because it didn't matter who you were, where you were from, what you looked like. I mean, you were special in your own way. And the fact that they were fighting against real world biases and prejudices and all that, I thought was really a unique kind of comic book.
Yeah, me too. And it opened my eyes to people being different isn't something to be afraid of, and that concept in X-Men of like, don't be afraid of the other. I think was really, really powerful. So I just wanted to throw that out there because you mentioned it, and I thought, hey, you're the person to mention that too. So if you could tell a novelist one benefit they would get from reading a comic or a graphic novel, what would it be?
It would be the storytelling. And there's good storytellers and some not so good storytellers, like anything else. But the thing about a comic book is what goes into a panel goes into a paragraph, essentially. You get that one key action, and it's taken on serially. And then you have a dialogue exchange, and notice how the art and even the shadows will point to the next panel. And that's what a good paragraph should do. It should lead you into the next one and the next one and keep the story flowing. So it's done in visuals, but everything is there and it translates pretty perfectly.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect explanation. So you worked with some legendary writers when you worked for Marvel and DC Comics. What would you say you learned from that time in your career that helps you the most with your writing today?
I learned that it doesn't matter what you do or who you are. If you want to follow your dreams and become a writer, you can do it, because we're all from different backgrounds. And the two that you mentioned, like John Ostrander, who created the Suicide Squad, he came from a theater perspective. So again, that translated different forms of storytelling.
Mhm.
And then you have Alan Moore, who wrote for like fanzines, and he became like one of the biggest writers, if not the biggest writer in the entire comic industry. And you can tell that Alan, though, is a guy who's either read a lot or just has a really hugely expansive mind, because his comic books read like something from a novel. It's not exactly all strictly comic book prose. And so many movies were adapted from his work. And Alan is also a guy that writes on a typewriter, old school. He doesn't use a computer. So that's a little known fact. He has a closet that has mountains of manuscripts. I mean, he can't even go back and find old manuscripts because there's so many pages in there. So
Really interesting. Like that's quite an interesting little nugget of information.
yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about this. I have a friend, Nia, the Vixen of Fiction, who's working on a graphic novel right now. So talk to me a little bit about somebody who's wanting to break into comics or graphic novels. What sort of advice would you give them?
Well, I would say if you're going to break into comic books, don't give up, because it's made more difficult, just like everything else in publishing. I think that the last I heard, you were getting like 3 issues, and if sales didn't go up within 3 months, which isn't even enough time to get your work out,
Yeah.
you're immediately let go and somebody else is brought onto the book. So that's what new people in comics are having to deal with.
Wow.
But there's also alternatives. You can self-publish and do your own comic books.
So what does that look like?
Well, I have a friend who's been working on a comic book for a while, and he has several issues, and he's been looking for a way to get it inked. He's a very good storyteller, but he needs an inker, and he's been after me to ink it for a while. And finally, I said, if there's no tight deadline and I could just work on this a couple of days a week, I'll do it. So I'm going to be working on one of those comic guys that's self-publishing his series. I think there's like, did he say like 12 issues or something like that? But he has really, again, interesting looking characters. So and his storytelling from the panel perspective is great. So I said, I want to ink this just looking at it.
Yeah, totally. I'm feeling Michelle's comment about the 3 issues and then you're cut. Like, that's brutal.
It is brutal. It's very brutal.
Is that even enough time for a comic to get traction with a new writer on?
No, it's not.
Yeah.
So you have to make an immediate splash, and it has to be a pretty big one, because sales aren't immediately going to go up.
Right.
So again, it's about being likable, I think. If the editor likes you, they may keep you around a little bit longer. There's 3 things that they talk about in the comic industry that I think applies to any publishing. And that's if you're a really nice person, meaning likable, you're really talented, or you're really reliable. The first editor's office at DC that I walked into had that triangle on the wall, and it said, pick any 2 and you will probably make it in the industry.
Interesting. Okay. I mean, I do think it's probably pretty good advice, though, in general, because I'd even say in business too, right? I mean, it's the people that are a little more charming and good at networking that usually make your go. So
you can be a real jerk and be very reliable or very talented, and you can still make it.
So there's hope. There's hope. That's what I
Yes.
Oh, that's funny. Well, okay, I'm going to shift gears and we're going to talk all about Story Detective. We're going to talk all about the channel. So this was my first introduction to you, actually. We were lucky enough to be on a panel together over on Laurie Writes the Blues, which is how we met. And I was impressed with you right away. I loved your command of the topic. And of course, we were talking Marvel, so it was definitely up your alley. But I was impressed. So I wandered over and went down the rabbit hole, and I loved it. So talk to me about what made you decide to start a YouTube channel, and specifically come over to our niche, the AuthorTube side. What made you decide to do it?
Well, this might sound kind of bad, but I was looking at AuthorTube from the outside in, and my significant other was saying, you should do a writing channel. You should do something for YouTube. And I put it off and I put it off. And when I first started looking at videos, I said, where's the writing advice? And I said, you know what? I think maybe I want to start a channel because somebody needs to be on there giving advice, because at the time nobody really was, except for maybe Alexa Dunn.
Mhm.
And it was very little, few and far between.
So how long have you actually been on? How long have you been on the platform?
It's been about 3 years.
Interesting. Okay, that's important for a question we have coming up in just a second. So we've talked a little bit behind the scenes about how my husband's a big fan. And the question that Ricky wanted me to ask was about the lightsaber video. So because he's obsessed with your lightsaber videos. So, and I just told him about your website today. So that was a whole new exciting thing that he didn't know. So I sent him that. But tell me this, the lightsaber video, where did that idea come from? And did you have any idea it was going to blow up like it did?
Well, no, I don't think you can really have that idea or expectation going into any of this. But the lightsaber video, the first one, was my gateway into YouTube in general. I had been a Star Wars fan, as you can see in the background, for years, and I wanted a realistic lightsaber replica, not like a plastic toy you would get in the store. So when I found out that these things, somebody was making them, I started watching YouTube videos, and there were like hundreds of those mystery box videos of people opening lightsabers and seeing what they could get. And they were about $75. And I thought, that's something to invest in, just to see what it looks like and if the quality is there. And when I got that, I decided to go ahead and follow through with it and give it a shot and see how that worked out. And it started getting some views. And some marketing people said, if you're going to do the writing stuff, don't put the lightsabers in, because that's going to offend people and put them off. And I said, you know what? It kind of ties in, because it's all kind of fantasy and writing and storytelling and part of my background, since I worked on Star Wars comic books. Excuse me. So I decided to ignore that advice and just leave it in. And it turns out that if I didn't leave it in, I wouldn't have gotten monetized on YouTube quite so quickly, because that got me the hours worth of viewing that the writing videos did not, which I thought was kind of sad, but at the same time, it helped. Be diverse. Just, that's business 101. You diversify. And a lot of times you would have different channels to diversify, but if you can put it all under one umbrella, like I just said, if it's part of your history and part of your storytelling, you like science fiction or whatever, then go for it.
Yeah. No, I love that advice. I kind of felt the same thing talking about my Crohn stuff, because it was like, ooh, that's different. But I tried to tie it into how it impacts writing as much as possible. Yes. But same concept. So I think that's solid advice. So your videos are so in depth, especially when you go into story, which is what I love. And we're going to talk about some of those videos in a second. But how long does it take you to create a video from brainstorm to upload? What does that process look like?
The brainstorm could be as quick as a few bullet points, or sitting down and scripting something for a couple of days. Same with filming and editing. I've done videos in like a day, and then there's been other videos that it's taken me 3 days or more to edit, with all the video clips and reference, and a lot goes into that. It's hard.
Yeah. I think it's underappreciated. I think a lot of
it
is. Too. So what advice do you have for someone who's thinking about hopping in the AuthorTube pond? What do you say to someone?
Just like being an author, find your own voice. Don't do what everybody else is doing, because you have to look at everybody else and say, is that the sort of success that I want to have? Is that the kind of channel that I want to have? And ask yourself some realistic questions about it. Because what they're doing and what you do, your tastes are completely different, and you're essentially marketing yourself, and it's going to fall or succeed based on you and how good you present yourself and your interests.
I think that's pretty solid advice. So how has AuthorTube as a whole, as a niche, changed since you joined?
It's gotten bigger. Aside from that, I don't think there has been any real change to the core. the core is the same, which, as we've talked before, is basically YA fantasy. That's the biggest portion of AuthorTube.
Yeah. What do you think that phenomenon's about? Like the YA fantasy thing. Why do you think that's so dominant in our niche?
It's how AuthorTube started out. So that algorithm was attracted to that. And also we had an entire generation that was, let's face it, inspired by the Harry Potter novels. And there was a lot of YA fantasy fans out there that wanted to write. And when AuthorTube started producing videos, people just congregated to that.
Interesting. Yep, we're getting a... There we go. We got a lot of them here. I know. I got a lot of them in my audience. I'm not dogging you. I'm written one myself, so not dogging it. So talk to me a little bit about what surprised you the most about creating requested content, because I have noticed that you've done videos specific to what people have asked for. So talk to me about that a little bit.
My advice is don't do it. I think when people say they want to see this or that, there's a couple of schools of thought that I've had. One, they're not very specific. Like I talked about comic books in a video and people said they wanted to hear more about comics. Looking back, I think they wanted to hear more about my stories in comics and not comics in general. And when I started doing comic book videos, they just got basically ignored by most of the AuthorTube views. So it didn't really take off. So again, take it with a grain of salt and decide how you want to present it. And again, how it fits into what you do.
Yeah.
Comic books were a part of my past, but they fuel a lot of what the foundation is of what I do in storytelling. But is it essentially who I am on AuthorTube? That wasn't, I mean, that was something that I put up in the beginning, but those videos were rarely seen. So I don't think people got them. And then later I just did writing videos. So when I came back with comic book kind of content, they were just like, this is different. And I don't care.
No, I've definitely, we've all made a few of those videos. Okay, no one showed. Yeah, so I know that. So tell me this, if there's one thing that you could wave a wand and change on AuthorTube, what would it be?
Oh, lots of thoughts I have on that one. You can't really change AuthorTube, I don't believe. I think there's several things that as a platform are good and harmful at the same time, depending on your point of view. The YA fantasy group, for example, it's a bubble. But since AuthorTube is a very small niche on YouTube, it's more like a fishbowl. And you have, I guess, what you would consider to be the bigger fish within that bowl. And then there's everybody else that gather around the bigger fish. It's a very insular situation. So that protects you maybe from outside forces or things that you don't want to get involved with. And that part of it is fine. And then you have the people that, the advice, people like Lisa Daly, who I think a lot of these people should be going to and saying, hey, I need some advice. But they're all of the mindset that YA fantasy is the thing that you have to read. And if you read anything else, it's somehow going to pollute what you're doing.
Yeah.
But good writing is good writing. And you have to kind of go down various paths with it and understand what good writing is. If you're saying, well, I need to really understand and take the advice to heart that I need to just figure out everything about my genre, it doesn't take a genius to know what the specifics are between YA fantasy and horror and what sets them apart from the other genres that are different. But the good writing that goes behind it all is the same.
Yeah. No, I think that's excellent advice. I also loved what you said about reaching out to folks, because I think that's been something that I've learned in the back half of this year is that if you don't ask, it's always no. So don't
ask, you don't get.
It's the old, like, you can't win the lottery if you don't play. So it's like, get out there and just, ask, shoot your shot, because the worst that they can say is no. And yes, I agree with you on Lisa Daly for marketing. I think you for specific story questions, I can think of lots of things that I would reach out and say, hey, I'm wondering how this works, or do you have a different take on this? And I think you're very open and approachable, which I think is the other thing too. I think sometimes we get a little starstruck with the bigger channels, like a baby channel. But even over, you're at almost what, 1,500 or 1,600 subs. So I think when you get to that size, we kind of think, oh, will they even notice us? And it's like, I think people are more approachable than we assume, you know?
Yes.
So don't be afraid, shoot your shot, friends. So tell me this, what are the most common traps that you see new AuthorTubers fall into?
Doing what the bigger fish in the fishbowl do. They're not necessarily big fish in the real world, but they are big fish in the bowl.
Yeah.
And they're not very approachable or accessible. They act like they're already in a league with Stephen King or Neil Gaiman. So there's very few comments or people that they will address unless they're having a live stream to promote their books or whatever. So you get this idea that you need to have that insulated, separation from everything else in the world. And I think that can be a bad influence on the people that are learning from you, because some of the bigger fish I know don't believe that YouTube is a place for community videos. But at the same time, you are the bigger fish and you're affecting that community. If it's limiting them, then it's kind of hurting some people. So you have to ask yourself, and my advice to them is, look at the people you're affecting. How do you want to affect them? And your channel can grow bigger if you have a little bit of engagement. And I think that's a mistake. Also, even if a big fish came in today and they had a best-selling novel that was getting all the good things happening to it, and they ended up with a big book tour and everything that went behind it, you're still not prepared for the future. You're still inexperienced, and you're not prepared for what's coming 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, because the industry is always changing.
Yeah.
And the thing is, if you're influencing a lot of younger writers or people just starting out, once they know better, they're going to leave you in the dust, and you're going to have to find your audience all over again, because the, shall we say, snarkiness of some of them won't last forever. It's going to put people off.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Fill in the blanks.
Yeah, right? I know what you mean. I mean, and I do get it too, right? Because the algorithm loves it, right? They love that, like, oh, it's a hateful video, and they love those. But I do always warn people. I'm like, it's the old business thing. Like, this will come back to haunt you at some point. So really make sure you want to do it. So let's talk about where you're heading in 2022. So what's the content that we can expect from Story Detective in 2022?
I'm still figuring a little bit of that out myself. I think that what I'm going to start doing is a little bit of give me one sec.
No, take your time. We're
getting a fresh cup of tea from my significant other, so that always helps.
I'm here for that.
Sorry.
No,
okay. Let's go back. What was the question again?
No, yeah, I was asking you about what's ahead for you in 2022, or kind of what are you wanting to do next year on the channel?
So it's going to be kind of an irregular kind of series here and video there. It's not going to be a weekly thing.
Okay.
Because I realize that trying to do a video every week is taking time away from other things. The fact that I'm putting that much time and effort every week into putting out a video, if it takes me 3 days to edit and I'm working 5 days a week, how much time am I writing?
Right.
So at the same time, I think that some of the series videos may be better if I work at them at my own pace and then put them out there, experimenting a little bit more. Like I said, I'm doing a 3-part video. I think it's going to be 3. It might be 4, but it depends, on the teachings of Lehos Igri, who has a lot of great stuff from a different kind of perspective of storytelling. Again, it's craft and it's solid, but he had a writing school back in the 1930s, and this book was published in 1942. But when you read it, it's like, oh, that's what that means. He's filling in gaps, and so much of craft gets lost over time.
Yep.
That you almost have to backtrack and see where those broad statements that people are taking literally, where they're coming from, because everybody assumes that everybody knows what they mean.
Yeah.
And it's like, stay in your own genre, stay in your own lane kind of thing. Does that really apply anymore today with self-publishing? Again, if you're going to diversify, if you love one genre, feel free to stay in it. But I think if you fail in that genre, you might succeed in another one. So, experiment.
Totally. I have 4-starred questions from our chat that I'm going to pop up just before we move on because they're good ones. Is it even possible to get into comics at my age? Richard is the old age of 30. So is 30 too old to hop into comics? Like, what's
no,
the age? Okay.
No, I've known people that got into comics, much older than that. Pick an avenue and dive down the rabbit hole. I mean, if you like superheroes, then pick your favorite, but go back a bit. Sometimes modern comics, they're being too experimental, and comic books are so left by the wayside of what the comic book companies are doing for movies now. And when you see things coming out, they don't even look like traditional comics. They don't read like traditional comics. And that would be fine if there was a story and a character and everything that goes with it. But the sad thing is there are a lot of new editors there. And Marvel Comics in the late 90s fired just about every editor except for a few standby people that were doing it for a while, and they hired a bunch of kids like right off the bus. And I was working with guys like Tom DeFalco, who's written every comic book character at Marvel. He was the editor-in-chief of Marvel, for crying out loud, and he's going in there saying, they would say things like, we don't know what's going to sell these days, we're totally lost. And he said, get back to solid stories. Think about story structure. And they looked at him and said, nobody uses story structure these days. And I was like, this is why we're lost.
Yeah, that could be part of the problem.
Yes.
I love this question for you because I think it applies to a lot of us. But we were talking earlier about the networking aspect, right? Of moving ahead. So what about an author? Thank you, author JL Slipak, for asking this. What advice would you have for an author with social anxiety?
Start a YouTube channel, because that will really help.
Yeah,
it's gonna take you time to find your way, but it will help you a lot. I mean, I never thought that I would be making videos or sitting here talking live on camera, because that's just not me, or at least it wasn't.
Yeah,
I was the kind of creator that was kind of an introvert, and I did my thing. I did my best work, locked up in my studio away from people. And, even having the experience of a career is different than getting on camera. The experience of a career can help, but it's intermittent. You go out and you do a book signing and you meet people, and sometimes it's great and sometimes it's a little scary, but you get through it. But then there's your day-to-day grind, and your anxieties still reside until you actually make a practice of overcoming it.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I'm seeing lots of encouragement also for you in the chat from that, because I agree with it. This question is going to just thrill my husband's heart. Chris Kinney asked, for later, rank the Star Wars films for me. Very interested to see where you put them all, especially the new ones.
The new ones don't rank.
Didn't make the list, Chris.
They are Star Warsy type stories, but as far as fitting them into the canon, there's so many things that were left out and so many things that got messed up along the way. They hired people with a new take, and it's like, let's get a fresh take on Star Wars, so let's hire XYZ. They don't know anything about the history of it, but they're a good director or a good film writer, so let's get their take. I think if they had time to actually sit down and go through all that, but there's so much to it beyond the films, and nobody would have time getting on a project like that and doing all that research. So that's why they don't rank.
Chris says, correct answer already, Robert.
Then I would go for the originals and the prequels, but the prequels weren't great films unless you watch the animated series. And if you watch the Clone Wars animated series, then the prequels and the characters really expand, and it's like, okay, this is actually some really solid stuff, and I like those characters, and I love the prequel area now, or era.
No, I love that. I think that's wonderful. Okay, some of the questions that I just popped into my starred section, I'm going to come back to. So Author JL Slickhack, CB394, and Minx, I'm going to come back to those questions because they actually fit a little better when we're talking about Robert's book series. So we'll come back to those. So Robert, I'm going to move us along because you know I like to land the plane right on time. So we are going to start talking about my favorite videos that you have. And I forgot to think to tell you, oh yeah, you probably made these a long time ago, so you forgot what you said. But we kind of talked about that in Lisa's stream today, but there are 3 videos that for me are constantly bookmarked that I check on the regular. And folks, they're linked in the description box below. I encourage all of you to check them out, but they are, we're going to go through them one by one. But the first one for me is a Preptober writing vlog you did a year ago, and it's on Save the Cat. And you found the villain hole in Save the Cat. And I didn't notice this when I read it. So I thought it was a great point, but I love that you use the same chapter for our hero and to do the same for our villain. So would you just like a little bit, if you kind of remember that bit?
Oh yeah. Well, villains get short shrift in a lot of things these days, including the last Star Wars trilogy. But yeah, I mean, they talk about the hero. They don't talk about the villain. But if you think about it, Save the Cat is written through story beats, which are based on film. They do apply to novels, but what are they going to base your novels on? The story beats?
Yeah.
I mean, you have to have characters, and it's the contest or the battle between your hero and your villain. If you don't have a villain, half of your story is missing. So I decided to plug that hole and say, hey, don't ignore your villain, because you know, you'll be sorry later. and so will your readers.
Too. I think, you know, I think that's something that I always get disappointed in certain books when I read a book and the villain's flat, or and again, Michelle talked about this on our collaboration. In middle grade, you want that villain to be a little more kind of cartoonish or exaggerated because it works in that category. Definitely, I've read some like YA books where the villain is cartoonish, and it actually pulls me out of the story, you know, because I think like, wait a minute, this doesn't seem like something someone would do. So yeah, no, I appreciated that video for that specific reason. So be sure and check that video out because it's a deep dive. It's linked below, friends. And don't forget to hit the like button when you watch it. It helps in the algorithm. So let me talk about the next one, which was called Storytelling: Can Comic Books Make You a More Visual Writer? And so not only do you get to see some of Robert's work in that video, but there are also some tips for comic lovers that are turned novelists like me. The villain point in this video is great, and every writer should watch to see that note. So once again, we're back to the villain point. But that video, do you have any memories from that one?
Was that the one that the best heroes could almost be?
Yep.
Or the best villains could almost be the hero? Yes. It's what they have in common. And if you think about the idea of Batman and the Joker, I mean, they're both narcissists and they're both kind of insane. It's just that Joker took it to a really evil place, and Batman tries to fix that hole by going his own route with it. But there are great similarities between the best heroes and villains through literature or comic books. And I think if you understand what they have in common as well as how they differ, they are both after the same story goal, because there is one story prize at the end of any story. And they're both shooting for that prize. It's just their means of getting there and what they do to get it that differs them.
Right. And to the villain, they are the hero. Like, that's the thing I was like, from their perspective, if I were looking at the story through their eyes, they're the hero in that story, and our hero is the villain. So balance it, friends. I am bookmarking those videos now to watch. Yes, they are wonderful, and I encourage you to do so because they are wonderful. The last one was super helpful to me because I had some notes that came back in my YA fantasy, while we're talking about how that's so popular on here, about world building. So I got some notes on that. Well, I went over to your channel, and of course there was tons there, but the world building 101 video, actually part 1 and 2, but part 1 is what I'm focusing on here, because you have a line in it it's all a bunch of bullshit, which is where you drop the harsh truths that writers need to hear, I think, and that the environment and the world does impact the story, and the stage the story takes place on. So that was why that video was so important to me. Is there anything from that one that you want to just toss out for folks about why world building is so important?
During lunch, that's the one video that I remember least, so I went back and watched that. The audio is terrible on that video, but that was when I wasn't scripting and I was just kind of making bullet points of those questions and winging it. So I was surprised that the advice, was flowing out of me that readily. But but all those questions that you break down in world building that's in that video, if you ignore any of them, then there's going to be holes in your plot. And as I said in the video, you can go through horror, science fiction, whatever genre you like, and say, wow, this is a really good concept, but why didn't the writer expand on this or make that more realistic, or fill in some of those holes? Because when they're missing, that's when your entire story falls apart. But especially for newer writers, if you ignore it, people are more critical of you than they're going to be of Stephen King or a bigger name author. So there's a lot of things in that I suggest people do go look at, because those videos, when I made them, were not very popular. And still the views in the comments, you can see, like, that video you're talking about had like 6 comments in its day. Yeah. And most of them were going back and forth between 2 different people. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of disappointing to see, because
it's a great video.
I think there was a lot of solid advice there.
Totally. It's rock solid from beginning to end, and have your notebooks out and ready, because it comes at you fast. So don't do what I did and get confused on the or get held up with the, oh wait, Robert just said a curse word. Just keep going through it and take it. So we're going to switch gears, Robert, because I'm fascinated in wanting to hear all about your book series. So talk to us a little bit about what is coming from you, and tell us about it.
Well, I have 2 series, and I have some standalones. So I've been working for a couple of years to stockpile novels, because I am self-publishing. And to self-publish, I was kind of under that whole law of 4 to 6 novels per year before it became 12 or 24 and just kept expanding. And finally, I realized that also is a bunch of bullshit, because you can't produce good work if you're putting out a novel or 2 per month. I mean, that's insane. And the longevity for that, I mean, how long are you going to last sitting at your desk trying to crank out stuff? Right. I know from working those comic book deadlines that it becomes detrimental to your health, mental and physical, because you put so much time at the desk. And that's not a good thing either. So
I thought Thanos was an island off of Greece.
I did do a video on villains where I mentioned Thanos, because as far as the comic book villains, he at least has all the elements. He's not the Thanos in the comic books, but he does have the elements to make a good villain.
Yeah. I kind of agree with you on that one. So I was going to ask you about the rapid release, but I love that you said that's kind of BS. So talk to me then a little bit about what your plan is on release. Are you kind of, now that you're not under that arbitrary deadline sort of thing, what is a realistic goal for you of what you'd like to produce every year?
Within my 2 series, I broke them down because I'm a fan of larger stories. I have problems thinking small, so I broke them down into 4 novels of about 30 to 50K each, and I was going to release them as a serial kind of novel.
Okay.
And people again said, don't give us stories where it's continued in the next part. But I've seen that in comic books.
Yeah.
And that's a mistake. If you have a story that's too long, that's a mistake. If you have a story that is too short, this could also be a mistake. So 4 gives you, like every quarter, you'd be releasing one part of it. So within a year, you'd get the whole story. And if you have a 30 to 50K novel, that's a pretty substantial read, and you have room to develop the characters. So I did that in my Sherlock Holmes series, and I did it in a science fiction series. And that's what I had planned to do initially for those. But then I have some standalone novels, and they'll be interspersed in there somewhere. But as far as release dates and trying to factor it all, I think it'll be like my videos where I'll have like groups of things that come out, and then there might be a break, and then something else will come out. It's not going to be like rapid fire, release, because, no, I'm not going to
appreciate it. I'm going to put some of these comments about it just so you can see them. From Dal Cecile Runo, I'm making a video about this rush to publish BS. Good. Can't wait to see. Richard says, I think a book a month is almost like showing contempt for your audience. Like they'll just buy whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm with you on that one.
Again, Neil Gaiman might be able to do that, but you can't.
Yeah.
Because they're going to look at you and say, I don't want any more of this, rapid release stuff if they find those gaps in your storytelling.
Yeah.
If your story essentially does not satisfy them, and how are you going to maintain that if you're learning craft and you've come onto AuthorTube and everybody's putting out books? And I look at people that have been doing it for the past couple of years, and they have 3, 4, 6 books out already. And I'm like, wow, you can learn by doing. And I think it's great that they're doing it. As Michelle Schusterman once said, putting out those books and continuing to write is a great learning process. But I would say if you really don't have any experience at all, write a book or 2 before you start putting them out, especially if you're doing a series, and then look at it. By the time you're on the 3rd book, look back and say, is it all holding together? What have I learned that I can go back and adjust a little bit? I mean, would that hurt you to wait a year before you put your book out? Probably not.
I mean, fair. So let me ask you this then. So speaking of, pursuing self-publishing, you're someone who definitely could have gone traditional as well. What tipped the scales for you? What made self-publishing more attractive to you?
I need a sip of tea for this.
No. Sip it before you spill it.
Mm-hmm. This might sound a little harsh for those that are seeking traditional publishing, but it really is brutal. And I got so tired of kowtowing to companies, and especially in comic books when you're doing other people's characters and you have very little creative control. And I wanted to do my own thing. I wanted to I knew enough that I wanted to produce a book that was crafted well, but I didn't want to have somebody telling me it's released this date, and you're pushing a project and you're working those deadlines after so many years of doing it. Yeah. Again, my health has already been affected by several things, including a car accident. So I can't always get up and say, today I'm going to plan to write for 8 or 10 or 12 hours, because some days I might be able to do that, and other days, forget it. I get nothing done.
Yeah.
So I can't exactly do that. Hence my stockpiling novels and trying to get ahead.
Sure.
But even if you're completely fit and raring to go, that whole rapid release thing is going to burn you out faster than you know what to do with. And I see a lot of people looking back and saying, well, I tried writing, but it just wasn't profitable for me, and it was too hard, because they follow the rules that everybody else set for them and not follow their own hearts and producing something that would be a little more craft centric.
Yeah, no, totally. I'm going to throw Michelle's comment up because it's a good one. Aside from money, rapid release is what makes me think self-pubbing isn't an option for me. And I know it's a prerequisite of self-pubbing, but it sure seems to be something a lot of self-pubbed authors do and advocate. And
Yes,
I agree.
they took that advice to heart, just like every other piece of advice that comes along without really understanding why, because they don't have any experience to back it up.
Yeah.
Once you get a little experience, you'll understand that that's a bad way to go, because what you start out doing, if you do develop an audience, this is what they expect from you.
Right.
So you want to come into this on your own terms and not somebody else's. And if you haven't explored these terms and what they really mean for your future, again, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, how long do you want to keep writing?
Yeah.
How long is this going to be viable for you?
Yeah. I think that's great. I think the only thing I'd tack on that I always remind my folks writing Kitlit that we talked about in the middle grade, know your category, like know how your category sells. So, middle grade isn't going to do as well, which we've talked about in self-pub. So whatever your category is, make sure that it's going to work there, and then go forth and do what's best for you. Is what I would say. So talk to me then about what inspired your series. You've got 2 series and then several standalones that are in the same world, Robert, or are they outside of the both of those worlds?
Well, they're all different worlds and different genres. The Sherlock Holmes is obviously kind of like a mystery with a little bit of a literary flavor. There's a science fiction story that is kind of, it's a little more comic book oriented and taking it into a novel approach and format. And then I have a horror story, and there's a couple of different things in there. But yeah, I don't want to, there's certain genres that I could be happy writing in forever, and those are my larger series.
Mm-hmm.
There's other things. I grew up like reading horror and watching horror movies, and I'm surprised I'm not strictly a horror author. But over time, your creative interests will change. And that's another reason that I don't advocate sticking with one genre. If you're going to self-publish and do this all yourself, what are your other interests? Because as much as I love comic books and the whole superhero genre of science fiction, I think it was probably when I was working at Marvel that it finally sank in. There was an inker who was doing like 5 comic books a month, and he was taking on an ungodly amount of work to pay for his mortgage and buying a house and all that. And he said his wife was some kind of clothing designer, and if they didn't share a studio in their basement, they never would have seen each other, or hardly seen each other.
Hmm.
And the guy that I was working with, my creative partner, was working with this guy for a number of years, and he said I can call him at 3 a.m. and he'll still be in his basement working. And I thought, this is not a life that I would want to have.
Work-life balance, people. Work-life balance.
Yes. At some point before you're 80, you want to have a life and you want to pursue other things. So
Agreed. The only benefit to chronic illness is it does sort of force the work-life balance sometimes.
yes, it does.
It's a silver lining, if I'm going to find one. There was a question for you specifically about chronic illness from Minx Kenosha, who is our friend Aphrodite Lee. That's her pen name. What advice can you share on managing chronic illness as an artist? And I think that's a great question. So I'm curious what your advice would be.
Find a good doctor, because doctors will diagnose without often listening. Make them listen, and if they don't, find a different doctor. I used to, when I first had this, I would go to one doctor and struggle with them and try to get them to listen to everything. And it was literally over 3 years later when I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia, after me telling them all the symptoms for that time. So these days, if I have a doctor, and I have a doctor like a practice that kind of has doctors in and out all the time. So I ended up in like 2020 losing a doctor that left the practice, and they came at me with a different one and said, try this person. I talked to them, and they were like putting in things that were never said. And there were parts of the conversation that right after the first appointment, I said, find me a different doctor.
Yeah. That's good advice in general.
And then,
yeah.
And then find what works for you in terms of balancing diet, exercise, and your work. Because if you don't have some kind of diet and exercise program going on, then your chronic illness is just going to take over your life. So you have to have that balance. And I've been in and out sometimes when I've let it slip for too long, and getting back into the groove has been harder.
Yeah.
And you have to maintain yourself, and you have to really be strict about it, but it's finding what works for you. Find out what your doctors say or physical therapist said, and then go through the motions and say, this made me feel better. This made me feel worse. And then go into your own practice with it and do it on your own. I mean, that's kind of what I did, and I found my own answers.
Trial by fire. I think that's fair. Well, Robert, we're going to switch over to rapid fire and then bounce back into some of our questions mixed in with some of the great questions we have already gotten from our audience. So here is the deal, Robert. I'm going to throw some questions at you. Feel free to skip if there's one that, just something doesn't pop to your mind, but I'm just looking for the first thing that pops in your head. So if you need to skip, just tell me and I'll move along. All right?
Okay.
So here we go. What is your greatest fear?
My greatest fear? I think I overcame most of my fears. I don't like bees. And I guess if I have to end this life knowing my chronic illness, I would rather not end it in dire pain. I guess those would be my two fears that are the hardest to overcome.
Yeah, I imagine. What is your biggest regret?
I don't really have regrets. I have a few things that I would like to go back and change, but since I can, and looking at what I learned from them, I would probably be a different person today if I skip those things.
I love that answer. What would your friends say is your best trait?
The fact that I'm always trying to encourage. They'll look at it as my best trait and my worst trait, depending on whether they want to be encouraged.
I get that one too a lot. They call it toxic positivity. What name would you give yourself if not Robert?
I've came up with pen name after pen name, and none of them stuck. So I'm gonna just stick with Robert.
Fine. What annoys you the most?
I guess the bullshit and the lies that people kind of digest as the truth, especially in the world we're living in today. And you can accept anything and make a theory for it, but that doesn't mean that it's reality. It can become your reality, but it's not necessarily a fact.
Could have said it better myself. What word do you hate?
All words are useful. I don't know if there's any offhand that I hate.
Okay, we can pass it. Do you have a word that you love?
I guess love is a good word, because if you love something, you'll take it to its furthest extreme and go farther with it.
Yeah.
So yes.
What is your favorite curse word?
I don't know if I have any. It's whatever flies off.
Flies out.
Yes.
Stay tuned. What can always make you smile?
My significant other, our crazy conversations. We were talking the other day how if I wrote a short story based on my dreams, which seem the most erratic and crazy things, we'll often crack each other up just talking about my dreams. She doesn't remember a lot of her dreams.
Ricky doesn't either. Write mine down.
I'll come up with these ridiculous scenarios and we'll just crack up over it. And I said, if I wrote this down, it might be interesting, but everybody would think I was on drugs. Like hardcore.
So tell me this, when are you at your happiest?
When I'm doing something creative. I think if I don't create for a prolonged period, and have had times in my life when I've had those periods, then life is out of balance and I'm irritable and things just aren't good.
Yeah. Who can always talk you off a ledge?
That would be my significant other.
Morning person or night owl?
I'm a morning person. I've become more of a night owl since I've met my significant other, but too many night owl sessions will throw me off because then I'll tend to sleep and not get an early start, and my whole day will be thrown off after that. So definitely a morning person.
Same. What one word best describes you?
Again, I'll have to go with encouraging, since that's...
I like that. What sound soothes you?
What?
Sound soothes you.
What sound suits me? Music.
Okay.
Preferably rock, progressive.
Cool. Who is your harshest critic?
Me.
And my favorite question, what superpower would you want if you could have any superpower?
That's something I've thought a lot about. I think there have been times when I thought the whole God and man thing, and what would you do with that? And that's kind of what I lapsed back on in my science fiction story, because I came up with a lot of really good questions that weren't answered in most comic books and movies that tried to do that. But I think either some kind of powers of light, because that would be great to just be able to go through a window or change yourself molecularly.
Yes.
And again, the first comic book I worked on monthly with DC was The Ray, and that fit that bill rather nicely. And that was one of my favorite books to work on from month to month.
Oh, I bet. When I always think of the light superpower, I always think of Dazzler, but I don't know what happened to that character.
I'm not sure either.
It was like a side character that I thought was going to be something and then disappeared. No, I love that answer. The one I always say is definitely, I saw it and someone said it, teleportation. If I didn't have to get on a plane again, awesome. I'm all about that. So thank you for doing that for me and indulging me. That's one of my favorite parts. It's sort of my throwback to the Actors Studio, if you ever watched that one with James.
Yes.
Stein, where he'd ask the quick questions. So yes, that's what that's an ode to. So we're going to pop the craft question up, but I'm going to ask some of these great questions that I had starred for us to come back to, because they're really, really great. And there's an audience, which I love. So first up is Richard Holiday, and he asks for Robert on his thoughts on toxic productivity culture, please.
I would say just, again, avoid it. Are you talking about like the cancel culture and all of that?
Yeah, I think it's more of the like pressure, and I've noticed it more in AuthorTube, but there's like a subtle pressure towards like need to be writing, need to be, and I think that's maybe what Richard's meaning is, especially for like chronic illness people who are watching like NaNoWriMo and stuff, that you're like, oh, I can't do that. It's like, that's okay,
Need to write every day, or here's how I outline everything, and follow my steps. There's a lot of that. And again, you have to find your own way. I mean, there are people that have big YouTube channels because of that, but it's not necessarily something, again, that's going to suit you in real life, at least not everybody, unless you're that kind of person that really needs that kind of a structured environment for your creativity. And I would say even then, if you are, again, experiment, because planning is great, pantsing is great, but I've never planned anything that I didn't pants to some degree, and I never pantsed anything that I didn't have to plan out afterwards when I got that jumble of a first draft done. So it all kind of works together, and if you're not doing both, again, combining some kind of different methodology, I don't think you're going to experience fully what your craft has to offer, or what your own imagination has to offer, because you have to kind of unlock the door and let some of that out.
Yeah.
Play.
I love this question from CB394. Question: why did they have Tony Stark not end up with Pepper Potts in the comics? Great question.
I can't say for sure from creator to creator. Everybody has their own philosophies, and in comic books, you only have runs. Nobody stays on a book forever. And I think it falls back into the whole thing from 70s and 80s TV, where if you hook somebody up, then they're not available for somebody else, and it limits your storytelling.
Okay. Okay, that kind of makes sense. That makes me feel better about it in the end. But yeah, I like that answer. Chris Kinney asks a follow-up to his question before. Do you think Dave Filoni should be the one to take the reins for the future movies?
Yes.
There you go.
And Filoni and Favreau, I think, are definitely people that have a better understanding of Star Wars, and you can watch the Clone Wars or the Mandalorian and see the difference between that and the last trilogy. So if they're in charge, I have higher hopes for the future of the franchise.
Author JC Carpenter asks, question, do you ever feel burned out, and how do you deal with it? Or how do you keep burnout from becoming a bigger problem?
Burnout to me usually means that I haven't fueled my input enough. There's input and output when you're creating. Mm-hmm. And if I'm not reading or doing something to fuel my creativity for a while, then burnout more rapidly ensues. Other times I burn out when there's a problem on a foundational level and a story that I'm working on and I haven't quite seen it yet. And I have to step back from it and look at everything and kind of get back to squares and find it. And usually when I find the answer, then I'm off and running again.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great piece of advice, JC. I hope that gives you the answer you were looking for. Chris Kinney comes back with another one. How do you feel about a writer genre hopping? For instance, I have a romance novel. We know my fiance did most of the work, but she's not there. And a sci-fi trilogy. I also want to write horror. Bad idea?
I don't think so. If you're traditionally publishing, then maybe, because they're going to probably tell you to pick one. For self-publishing, no. Again, I think it comes back to diversifying your business. As a self-publisher, you are technically your own publishing house. And if one publishing house only did one thing, again, they're looking to succeed or fail and putting all their eggs into that basket. And it's great if it succeeds, but if it fails, then what? You're reinventing everything from the start. So why not have a little diversity from the beginning? A small business will have different hats that they wear, and they will, like the smaller comic companies I started working for originally would have one line, which was baseball comics over here, superhero comics here, profiles of the stars over here. That was the first comic book company I worked for, and they had 3 different names, and they came out with 3 different kind of ideas. Mm-hmm. And that was probably my first exposure to it. And they're like, you have to diversify, because if one of these things fails, then what are we going to do?
Right.
So I took that to heart. And small business, I hear everybody becoming authorpreneurs and entrepreneurs, which is a false definition of the term. An entrepreneur is somebody that puts money or time investing in something that few people would invest in to help that person. That is not AuthorTube. That is nobody who's starting a small business. A small business person diversifies,
right?
Not diversifying too much, but diversifying enough to where you have something to fall back on if one idea fails. 2 or 3 might be a good idea.
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to ask you the craft question I love to ask, which is there a craft book or a piece of advice that you swear by?
I have several, and I've lined them up over here.
Yes. I hope
First of all, there is story engineering. And that's by Larry Brooks, another guy who I knew pretty well. And I think he really gives a large part of structure that Save the Cat is missing, because Save the Cat nails it down to too many beats, and Larry does it in fewer beats, and it's closer to the psychology of story structure that it was meant to be. Larry is not an original idea. He got it all from Sid Field doing screenplays. So a lot of our structure comes from screenplays, and screenplays are not novels. As Saul Stein told me, and that would be my next one, Stein on Writing, who was my mentor. And he said, and I think he repeated it in one of his books or some of the software he came out with, that a screenplay is not a novel. And a screenplay takes your manuscript and shakes all the nuance out of it, and you're left with dialogue that's supposed to infer what you mean rather than what is said. And if you're not really good at dialogue, because it's then left up to the interpretation of the actor and the director and everybody else. And then there would be Story by Robert McKee. Again, this has some great advice as far as character interaction and scenes. It's absolutely brilliant when it comes to that. But again, it's for screenplays. And if you try to take this and make it your one and only thing for writing a novel, you're going to be missing some things.
Yeah.
So if you want to have structure, there are how many different types of structure? Let me check. Including Save the Cat, there is, I think there's like 16 or 18 different structural layouts, and they give you a few pages. Yep. And they break it down so you can see different types of structure and realize there are many different types of structure and what they have in common. That would also be a great one.
Love those.
You don't want to fall into one type of structure and do everything, because Save the Cat, when it comes to writers who've been around for a while, including publishers and agents, they see those beats coming at them. And when you're essentially a large group, or you're writing the same basic novel, you're using the same beats, what's different? Your magic structure, your world. Again, that's not enough to make you stand out. If somebody says, what makes you different than every other person who's writing in this genre? And you say, wow, my magic system.
Yeah.
Is that enough? No.
Yeah. So, you know, I always love the candor. I'm not ready for it, but I love it. So how extensively do you outline, if you outline at all?
Yes, I outline, and I will come up with a scene by scene outline with a couple of lines for each scene, and spend like 2-3 months just filling up a notebook with ideas, and then I will start that outline. If I get the basic outline complete and a notebook at least around halfway filled with ideas, within those couple of months, I'll know it's something that I'm writing a lot about.
Yeah.
Then I usually sit down and I'll write like 1 to 3 chapters and see how it feels. And if it feels good, then I will take off with it or get back to the outline and figure out the characters a little bit better.
Yeah. Richard, I'm going to do chapters later tonight, so look for them tomorrow. CST time in the morning. I'll have the chapters and I will add links to all the books. So yes, I shall. And Doll says, I'm so glad about the stream. Well, good. Thank you. I'm glad to have you, Doll, always. And this is a good point to let everybody know. We're trying to raise money to send Doll a new computer. There is a link in the description box below, as well as the video on Robert's channel telling you all about why we're doing it. So get out there and let's support one another. Doll is an important member of my community and Robert's, so we appreciate you doing that for us. So Robert, tell me this. What is your writing kryptonite?
It used to be beginnings. Now I think I've gotten better at beginnings, and I don't know that I have any distinctive kryptonite at this point, because it's all a challenge. And one day I might wake up and it might be a description that I'm having trouble with, and the next day it might be this character that's not doing coming across the way they should. But you know, they're all problems to figure out, and it changes. And I think it's always going to change.
Lovely endorsement from your friend Lisa Daly. Robert is the king of craft, and that is.
Thank you.
I agree. So, and this is a question I'm going to try not to laugh while I ask it. How has AuthorTube changed your writing process?
Making videos and editing was a different type of storytelling, but that was sort of on me and not so much AuthorTube. Yeah. Now on AuthorTube, I have something else that isn't necessarily within the questions, but it's part of all that we discussed about AuthorTube in general. Yes. Since we do have the larger fishbowl or the bubble of YA authors, and then as we've gotten bigger, we have all these other little pockets or individuals that are doing different genres, and they can't seem to find their place, and they can't find their place in the algorithm or on AuthorTube. So this is an idea I've played around, and I've mentioned it to a couple of people, and the couple of people that I mentioned it to thought it was good. If we get more than 2 or 3 people saying, yes, that's a good idea, then I will do this. But I think we should do WriterTube and do a completely different tube where all those other little pockets can come together and be found and support one another, because they're not getting the support from the group that's on AuthorTube because they are that insulated kind of society. So if you guys want a broader society, I will come up with a tag and come up with some interesting questions that will be different than AuthorTube, and we will try to form a different pond that we can bring, everybody's welcome. And
I'm so here for it. I mean, listen, y'all, you came for an interview and left with a revolution. So, hey, that's...
If you want the revolution, let me know and we will start it. And definitely the only prerequisite is a love of craft and wanting to write your book as good as it can be. Everything else is welcome because we're all a little bit different. We all go by the same thing, but we all take those points of craft and use it differently depending on who we are and what's important within our story.
Yeah.
But understanding it helps us to write a better story in general, no matter how you use it. But there's no one rule that's going to fit everybody in the same way. But understanding what that role means and how you adapt it, I think, is key.
Yeah. No, I appreciate that. That is the answer I wasn't expecting, but I'm glad came out. My next question for you, someone else asked, so I'm going to go back to my starred questions. But before I do, since I know Lisa Daly's here, she just had a book release on Tuesday. Lisa, drop your link for folks to go find it if they want to support you. So if you have it handy, Lisa, drop it in the chat. I know you have a wrench and you can do that. So this next question was one of mine, and I wanted to, Richard asked it though in a better way. So I wanted to ask it this way. What has been the best investment in a tool for your writing journey? Is it a device, a book, software?
The writing books that I just showed you was a really smart investment.
Yeah.
I would say for me, it's the platform, and I switched probably partway into my writing journey to Apple, and that's just a platform that suits me better because I can dictate on my phone and come home and the same document is there on my computer. So it's very interchangeable. And I think for me, Apple is more creator oriented. Mm-hmm. And I like that. Not everybody is going to like Apple, but that I think was a smart investment for me personally.
I'm with you 100% on all the things, all the devices. So author J.L. Sliphack, and I may be saying your name wrong. Let me know phonetically, J.L., if I am saying it wrong. Question, what are your thoughts regarding books to film or fantasy books into a game?
I think that's all good. If you're lucky enough to get picked up for a film or a game, don't expect it to be your book. Just expect it to be publicity for your book. I think I heard someone say at one point, my book is still here, even though the movie is different. It doesn't change the book. And that's probably the best approach to take. Yeah. But there's a lot of streaming services out there. And I think it's a good opportunity to sell your own franchise to somebody else and make those pitches and get ideas out there. Again, if you're going to be your own publishing company, look into your own ideas for getting it out there in film or a TV series. Streaming is probably better than film because they have more episodes to explore. It'll still be different, but it'll be a little bit more to it. Mm-hmm. And explore your options. Don't be afraid of that. Yeah.
No, I'm here for that. I'm loving everybody's jumping in on the thoughts on the tube, writer tube, publishing tube. I like the Alpha Smart. So there's lots of, and we're getting the approval for the Apple. Yes. Okay. I'm big. I'm trying to tell everybody. Oh, thank you. I'm glad. I was worried I was pronouncing it wrong. Thank you. All right. I have 3 more hard questions. So folks, if you have questions for Robert, drop them in the chat. I'm going to start starring them so we can come back to them. This is one from the Marvelverse. CB394 asks, why is there so little information about Pepper Potts?
There's characters that have had little or no information for years, even decades even. And I guess Pepper is just one of them. But that can work well for your character to have them a mystery. It can work well for other people to come along and add things to it. Then there is the possibility that people just haven't given that character a lot of thought. And not to diss comic books now or in any other generation, but you know, again, there's writers who give everything a lot of thought, and there's writers who give things very little thought, and they just sort of go with it because it's a published character. It's a visual kind of medium that incorporates words and pictures, and you just sort of go with the character and use them as the writer decides. And sometimes that can end up being a poor interpretation of that character when years go by and that character just hasn't changed or become anything.
This question is one only you can answer. Just Eva, question. Did the Alpha Smart trend die? I never found one. Is it worth a less tricky option?
The Alpha Smart is great. I mean, I have one, and I don't think it'll ever die. I mean, it can hook up to your computer and just print out whatever you've written, hook it up with like a cable that would be a printer cable, and it will transfer it from your Alpha Smart to whatever Word document you have open. But it's battery operated, no internet. You can take it anywhere, and it's the size of a keyboard with a little screen, and that little screen only shows you a few lines. So if you're the type of person that wastes a lot of time reading back and forth over your page, getting those few lines can be helpful, and sometimes it is for me. But the Alpha Smart, I think, is a great investment, and it's an inexpensive investment. When you have the free rate going for like $500, or they just came out with the one that's $800 or $900 for a screen and a keyboard, just go get an Alpha Smart.
Just Eva says sold. I'll keep looking for one. Yeah. Richard Holiday asks a question. What is the best tool for outlining in your opinion, and why is it Microsoft Excel? What does that mean, Microsoft Excel? I should have read the whole question, Richard.
For me, outlining has to be pen and paper. When I'm doing that part of the process of exploring, I need that time between my brain and my writing. And when I try to do it in a spreadsheet, I always end up failing. There's just something there that's missing from getting that pen and the notebook or scene cards or whatever that, you know, works for me.
Yep.
So
I missed the Alpha Smart. So I definitely, I don't know if I'm too old. Megan McCarthy's saying they had them in elementary school. So I'm like, was I too old for that trend? I'm not sure.
They taught typing classes. And if you buy them used, sometimes I think on the back of mine, you can see the trace of a class number or something.
Oh, that's funny. I love that.
Really cool.
Yeah. So tell me this, Robert, what does literary success look like to you?
Success would be to sustain myself on my craft, and just having fun with it, to be able to just do it at my leisure, to write every day or not every day, whatever my decision is, put forth a good book and have enough of a following of people that would say, okay, we like his version of storytelling and I'm going to buy that book.
For sure. Tell me this, what do you have a favorite book from when you were a kiddo?
When I was a kid, I read a lot of comics. Books, there was a horror kind of anthology, and oddly enough, it was my 4th or 5th grade teacher that read it in class, and you probably wouldn't find that today. And it was interesting. There was a story about an invisible monster that at the time really terrified me and my brother. And invisible monsters was kind of a favorite thing, and in some ways it still is if you could find it, because you don't see what's after you.
Yeah.
But it was called Ghosts and More Ghosts, and it was from I don't remember the publisher, but it was like a children's press, and I still have that book. And looking back at it, it was amazing the amount of thought that went into that anthology for a children's book. And compare that to people that say, oh, children's books don't have to be very depthy because it's just for kids. that book would not have had the lasting power or the impression that it had on me as a kid if it wasn't that well written.
Someday I'm going to do one of these interviews and someone's going to ask me what annoys you the most. It's going to be that. It's going to be when people say kidlit isn't, that you can't be so deep in kidlit. I always want to. So tell me this, Robert, do you believe in writer's block?
Yes, it's happened to me sometimes, but for the same reasons we discussed before. I'll have a problem with a character, something that's not as developed as it could be. I'm not putting enough input into my brain, or something else in life has just sent me off on a different kind of a chase. Like chronic illness. That can definitely lead to some times because pain does not promote good writing.
Right.
I think Stephen King said it best: when your life gets really interesting, your writing gets very bad.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Tell me this, is there a genre that you would write in that would surprise your audience?
I don't think my audience should be surprised at any genre I come out with. Just because if I come up with an idea and it's something that sticks with me, then I'm going to write it.
Yeah, I love that. So we could see a romance from you in the future, or something like a cozy mystery or something.
Well, I like cozies, and I'm a big fan of Jane Austen, which started the whole romance genre. So I would not be opposed to attempting something like that at some point.
Love it. Love it. I can't wait for that. Perfect. All right, chat. I'm giving it to you all. Keep asking us questions because I'm moving on to my live chat questions. So those were my craft ones. If anybody else has more craft questions for Robert, drop them in chat with a Q so we see them. Robert, I have a few more for you here. So tell me this. What is the most difficult thing about writing characters that are the opposite sex for you specifically?
I think it's just about, like your own voice's author would say, you have to step into that person's shoes and really understand them.
Mm-hmm.
And as a guy, especially when I was younger, do we really understand the opposite sex with all the rumors and the mythology that surrounds it? No, we don't.
Yeah.
And again, I'll still ask my significant other because there's things that I just don't think about, and I want to make sure I get it right.
I think that's the key, right? Be open to ask for help.
Mm-hmm.
So what sort of research do you do? As I'm thinking more of your sci-fi series, for example. Talk to me a little bit about what the research looks like before you begin the book.
The research for my science fiction story was just looking at the world and the news. And interestingly enough, when I came up with this story, it was when I first met my significant other, and I'm coming up with all these ideas and saying, this is my version of where the world as we see it could go in a nightmare vision. And over the last 4 or 5 years, she's like, your story is coming true. And everybody's going to think it was influenced by everything that's happened in the world within that time. And certainly when I go back to edit it, some of the real life events are going to influence the book. But no, the book ideas came out before things started happening in the world.
I listened to a podcast recently with Margaret Atwood where she said something similar. And I thought, yeah, that's more on the nose than I want it to be. So what has been your most effective form of marketing for your brand? So, and as far as, I know you've recently done the new website. So kind of talk to me a little bit about setting up your brand. What's been your best form of marketing?
Well, the website is for the lightsabers. I mean, that doesn't have anything to do necessarily with my writing, except that it kind of connects.
Right.
And I gave a lot of ideas and some artwork to Amy, and she seemed to have a very good idea of what to do with it. And I said, you just do your thing, because sometimes you just have to sit back and let people be creative, because that's when they do their best work. And she just redesigned my site, and it's a gorgeous site.
It's awesome.
But as far as branding, and this is the thing, we're doing our channels and our social media to build a platform.
Mm-hmm.
And is that marketing necessarily? It is, but is it marketing for what we're doing now, or is it marketing for our future books and our future readers? And that's another mistake that people make. When you're looking at it in terms of future readers and your future audience, I see a lot of people, and this may come integrate with some of the other questions. But I see a lot of people say, follow my writing journey, which is fine.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's nothing about writing. So if you have a journey to follow, make sure there's a journey. Don't say you're going to come follow my journey and then there's no journey to follow, because then I'll end up saying, ugh, and a lot of other people are going to leave too.
Right.
Your future readers aren't going to go back to that and say, what was their early advice like? Nothing, nothing, nothing. Wow. So I think it's all geared towards future readers. And I think what they would want to know about you as a writer. Again, it's marketing you, but it's also thinking about what they're going to be asking you. If you can think about what your future readers would ask you in an interview about your early days and your journey as a writer, that's what you should be making videos about.
Yep. I love this. Richard Holiday says, yes, yes. Even the author themselves needs a character arc.
Exactly. Exactly.
100%. It's the one thing about AuthorTube that drives me nuts. I watch the vlogs and I think, how is it we can write stories and yet the vlog does not have an arc? How does that happen? But yeah,
it's all about story.
Right.
And you can't be afraid to show your vulnerabilities, because that's part of story.
Yeah.
The story is, you can present a problem and then try to find a solution. And what your solution is now may be different a year from now. But I think there's people out there that need to hear what you're having difficulties with and what your solution for that problem is. That's your journey.
Yeah. I love this one's from Aphrodite Lee. Robert, why are you so awesome? So
I don't know that I am awesome, but I guess I've been around the block a couple of times enough to know.
So, throw your writer hat on, Robert. What is your animal or your mascot, your avatar, kindred spirit? If you were to choose something that represents you, what would it be?
Since I was a kid, I guess I've been fascinated with big cats, and I've always liked tigers.
I mean, did you watch Tiger King? I mean, that's my immediate question from that is, did you choose?
I have watched it. I have watched the train wreck that is Tiger King, and even the second one.
There's a second one?
Yeah, it's a short 5 or 6 episode, how the law is going after these people.
If anyone needs me tonight, I'm busy. I have plans now. That's hilarious. Just Eva asked, and I love this. Oh, have you submitted to CGL yet? No, he's not, but I'm going to ask him to come on and guest host with us at some point. Eva, I got to read your questions before I put them up there. What is your favorite underappreciated novel and author?
Again, that would probably be my mentor, Saul Stein, because even though he was a novelist and he had some books that sold really well, there were some that, and again, I read your question, so I pulled the book out.
Perfect. I'm going to blow it up.
This is a very, I guess what you would say, literary or high-class mystery / courtroom drama, but it is a really well-written book, and I would say probably my favorite of Stein's. If you haven't read this, and whether you like mysteries or literary or just interesting writing, that's a really good book. I've read that several times, and I continue to reread it every once in a while, just because I always learn something new, because he was such a craftsman.
And what do you think out of that book is something that the writer in us should look for the first time we read it? What are we looking for in the story?
I would say characters and prose. Now, Stein was a guy that said character comes first, and then your plot develops from your characters' wants and needs. Larry Brooks, who did story engineering, was the guy that said situation comes first and plot is ahead of character. But I don't necessarily agree with either one of those things. As I said in that story building or world building video, if you don't have both and they're not married so tightly to one another, you can't separate the two, then you don't really have a story, because your character is the driver of the vehicle and your plot is that vehicle. Without a character, your vehicle runs into a tree, and without an interesting situation, you could have a grand and glorious character, but what is he going to do? Just sit in deep thought all day long?
That's going to get boring. Really So this is one of my favorite questions. And again, I think you're well positioned to answer it. So what is the most unethical practice in the publishing industry right now?
It might be better to try to define what's ethical, because
Okay.
there's so much of it that I don't agree with.
Yeah.
I mean, the entire entertainment world is built on using authors or creators for their skills and getting paid a portion of what you deserve for your work. Michelle has covered this in so many videos on current dilemmas and problems, but yes, it's all rather unethical when it comes to the politics behind it all, because, and again, this came from Stein, big business started taking over in the 80s. Before that, publishing was considered a cottage industry, and they helped their authors a lot more with the editorial process. When big business took over is when everything started getting diluted and distilled down to, how can we get a book out there faster, cheaper,
Yep.
Get more for less. Stein's publishing company, he touted in his day, was the last holdout against big business. And their answer to that was lawsuit after lawsuit until he lost his business and lost everything except his home and a gigantic mortgage. They bankrupted him just for speaking out against them.
Wow.
So what's ethical and what's not ethical? I think big business is unethical. And when you get in there and you do it, expect it again as a publicity thing. It's a big hurdle. And if you get picked up by a decent publishing company, by all means do it, because that's going to get your name out there. But again, make other plans for yourself, because unless you happen to be the next Stephen King, they're just going to chew you up and spit you out in a few years. And then where are you going to be? You're going to start from scratch.
Yeah. Well, and it's the 1% thing, right? I mean, not everybody's going to be the bestseller or the earned out the huge contract.
Exactly.
Just like in every other thing, it's the few people at the top who are going to have that, and the rest of us are just clawing for our advance. But yes to all of that. Let me kind of pivoting off of that a little bit, and just while we're in the ethics side of things, is there anything in self-publishing that you see going on that worries you, or that makes you think, oh, that makes me a little nervous? And I'll tell you where I'm coming from with this. There's been an article that I read in Bloomberg about a month ago that was talking about how Amazon's was kind of the game changer for self-publishing. However, turning a bit into pay-for-play in the need to advertise on Amazon in order to get your book up the algorithm. So that's where the question's coming from. But do you see anything else going on in self-pub that kind of worries you, that big business mentality maybe seeping into self as well?
Well, the big business is there, and it's always going to keep changing, but it changes based on sales. Money is the bottom line for everything.
Right.
Now, the fact that Amazon has changed to like 12 and 24 novels per year, again, harsh truth, but sadly, most self-published books aren't selling that well. And that's because they are rushed to publication. And Amazon has figured out that all of those self-published people, if they have a platform on social media, have a small but loyal group. So when they put out something new, there's a little pile of money for Amazon. So if you have all these different self-publishers and there's all these little piles of money, why not say, let's have that every month, or let's have that twice a month?
Right.
That is the only reason behind the change of Amazon's algorithm. So again, my fear is, if you keep putting out the same type of novel or the same quality of novel that's not really taking off, there's a reason for that. And Amazon is not going to help you by upping the number of books you need to put out per year.
Right. It's helping Amazon. Richard Holiday has a question that I find interesting. Based on this, what do you think about celebrity authors occupying shelf space that other authors miss out on? Happens a lot at Christmas and kids' books. So what are your thoughts on that? Michelle talked about this recently in a video too, for folks that are looking for that. But yeah.
Again, I think it's, big business. I mean, there is an A list. And that A-list started in the 80s when big business started taking over. And that list is the people that get paid the most. And they're going to take up the most shelf space. They're going to be the ones that get the front racks or the tables and, you know, whatever remains of the bookstores out there. But again, it's all about money. And those who don't, you have to kind of work harder. Even if you're traditionally published, you need to find a way to market your book and get the idea out there and hope that you can actually cross some hurdles.
Yeah, I agree. I have some fun ones for you that are just settle it once and for all. Coke or Pepsi? Richard Holiday asks.
Coke.
Is there another answer? The question he always asks, which is pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
I don't mind it, but if I had to say, you know, this is going to be my dinner and the one thing I eat today, then I'd say no pineapple on that pizza.
Fair enough. Just Eva asks, is a hot dog a sandwich or a taco?
Technically, I think it's a sandwich.
I just watched an entirely too long documentary on Nathan's hot dogs, and I would agree with you on that one. But I do love this question. The indie stigma with books being rushed to publication has nothing to do with typos, grammar, or punctuation, in my opinion. How about you, Robert?
Rush to publication has nothing to do with typos and grammar. I've seen some pretty blatant mistakes. I've also seen some very clean copy get self-published because I think more people are going to people who are editors, but those editors are line editors. And if you're paying an editor, you're going to get clean copy if they're doing their job. But as far as people saying they are going to give you this service or become a developmental editor, don't, because they're not. If you're paying for a package, you're not getting it.
Yeah. I'm curious, are you, when you do self-pub yourself, are you going to work through like a hybrid publisher, or are you going totally on your own? I meant to ask you that earlier and I kind of forgot. Are you planning to do like a company situation or just on your own?
I'm going to be on my own, but I do have ideas of becoming my own company.
Okay, cool.
That's something with details and time, but I do have thoughts of doing that. Cool. It's not going to be very big or vast. My thoughts are that it's going to be something to help newer authors and to get them, you know, some help and some craft that's not readily available, because it's not readily available. Most of the popular books that people are touting is such a small, shrinking sliver that, you know, you have to dig much, much deeper.
Yeah, I agree. Books by Adrian just popped in, and I wanted to say this real quick. Adrian was on I was in a stream where he was on last Friday, and his dream interview was you. So I promised I was going to say, and then you guys chatted on Facebook about it, but I had asked you first. So I was sitting in the audience going, uh-oh, but I was going to mention, get on Books by Adrian, because he's a great interview as well. So he
asked me, I think, just before Thanksgiving, a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah, good. We're
working on it.
It's a ton of fun. It's a fun show, and he does a great job. So I'm glad you two are connecting, because he will get a kick out of it. Grayson, good to see you. I'm so glad to see you. I have a great question from Eva I wanted to throw up. What services do you offer? If she wanted to hire you, what would it be for?
That would be developmental edits. I have some clients that I'm working with. It's not something that I've paraded around AuthorTube because there were some stigma going on about selling services, but as far as that goes, it would be developmental edits with some other little tidbits thrown in, because I can't just stop at developmental edits without giving some further stuff on craft, and that would be me.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And let's see, Eva's saying goodbye. You do not have to outdo my interview. Yours are better. Victoria Wren says, hello, everyone. Just popping in to say hi and catch the replay. Good to see you, Victoria. Thanks for popping in. And Robert, I've got a couple more for you before we call it the day. What is the first book that ever made you cry or feel something deeply?
I don't know if I can remember the first book that made me cry. There for a while, I think I get emotional over anything that's good craft, whether it's good characters or a well-played scene. Feeling those emotions well up in me, whether I cry or I'm on the verge of it, I would say almost any good book or story could do that. So looking back to when I was a kid and what first made me, I'm not sure, but it was probably something to do with some of my favorite comic characters who were inadvertently killed, like the death of Jean Grey. That one I was like utterly shocked because I was following that story with the X-Men throughout my childhood. And it got to that one book that I was like, wow, I opened it up and I'm flipping through it. And it's like, they killed her. What?
Exactly. I'm going to throw this up because, Carrie, this is the one for me too. Charlotte's Web. If anyone ever asks me this question, that is always my answer. I will never forget being in third grade, reading that and crying in class. And I was the only one who did. So that one has stuck with me because of that. So we talked about genres, and you talked to me about being fearless when it comes to genre. But is there any genre that you would never touch, or would just there will never be a book from you in?
I would never say never, but if you see a Western written by me, then you know that never has come.
Never has come. Never has arrived. Yes, my answer to that one is always erotica. I'm like, in theory, I think I could, but then, like, when I read it, I go, yeah, there'd be no way I would know what I'm doing to pull this off.
I would probably write erotica over most Westerns, but yeah, that would probably be second on my list just because I don't want to go down that route.
Right. I mean, the Minx Kenosha, we can't all be Minx Kenosha. Like, that is just not my skill. The ending of The Amber Spyglass by Philip Pullman, I cried way too hard with that one. I did love that one too. Oh yes, Where the Red Fern. Okay, yeah, 100% on that one. You are right about that. Barrettica. Oh, that's hilarious. That's what we need. So, Robert, tell me this. What advice would you give a newbie writer that's sitting in front of you saying, hey, I want to get started? What is your go-to advice for them?
Read the books that I put up on screen earlier, and then take your time and figure out what you want to do. And then practice. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it won't be perfect. So don't try, just have fun with it. And then you take what's good out of it. And if it's a lasting idea, perfect it in the next draft. Yeah. So, my first novels, especially the first one, became a big practice. And by the time I was done with it, I didn't even want to write that style of novel any longer.
Yeah.
Because I had spent, I think, 2 or 3 years working on that book, draft after draft. And just when I thought I had things perfected, there were other problems because I was learning craft. And the more I learned, the more the book changed.
Yep.
Then ultimately I changed when I started communicating with Saul Stein, and suddenly he gave me a wide variety of books from different decades of past to read. And you can get some of those books mentioned in his writing, his novel. Again, Stein on Writing has several of them. Mm-hmm. And, I use that as sort of like, okay, I'm just going to, again, dive down that rabbit hole and read everything he showed an example from.
Yeah.
And in the beginning, I had to force myself because they weren't the type of books that I enjoyed reading. And then there were some surprises. And little by little, as I grew in craft, my taste completely changed. And then it's like, I need good wording. Otherwise, it's not worth it for me if the prose aren't there.
Yeah, no, I love that. I'm going to throw this question up from Books by Adrian. What's the comic book you can't stop rereading? Great question, Adrian.
Oh, I just bought a couple to reread, V for Vendetta and Camelot 3000, which I haven't read in a long time. And I've been kind of fascinated with the whole idea of King Arthur. And I think that as a science fiction story takes it to a different level. I'm surprised they haven't turned that into a movie, but give it time. Maybe it will.
Yeah. What is one adaptation you'd love to see that hasn't happened yet?
I guess the Camelot 3000 would be one of them. There's a lot of different stories that I don't think could be adapted from childhood. And then there's other things that they're managing to adapt the whole thing with Thanos, but look how they adapted it. They had to cut out so many characters from the whole Infinity War that it became a different story and Thanos became a different character. So what are you going to do?
Totally. I'm loving the chat talking about the books that broke them, but this one, Megan McCarthy, 100%. Bridge to Terabithia, like snot coming out of my nose, tears. So yes, that one also broke me. There are quite a few, and now that I'm thinking through the kid books that broke me. I'm gonna throw this up because this is one I agree with. Michelle Schusterman says, I would love an adaptation of The Night Circus. Literally don't care about the cast or the plot. I just want to see that circus on screen, and I could not agree more. So one I agree with.
There are books that you just want to see the visuals of it, played out in front of you, even if they half-ass it.
Exactly. Well, Robert, this has been lovely. I am going to wind things down. I want to give you an opportunity to do kind of an outro, pitch yourself, give everybody the elevator pitch that they need from Robert Jones, Story Detective.
Well, the elevator pitch again would be that I take all forms of storytelling and combine it, put it under a Sherlockian microscope, and break it down for the viewer in hopes of making your craft journey easier. And I'm not finished with my journey yet, and I don't think I ever will be. And I think that's the best advice that you can have. So what my channel brings to the table next could be anything that I discover that's interesting and I think is worth sharing.
And it is, and I'm going to tell you all, it is excellent, excellent, excellent content. Robert, this is wonderful. I appreciate you so much, my friend, for coming on, being so candid with us, and giving us your time. I appreciate you. Everyone out there, please stay healthy and well. Be good to one another. And I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow morning with Zara Hoffman and in the evening with Michelle Schusterman. So I look forward to seeing you all then. And until next time, bye, everybody. Take care and be good.
Take care, everybody.